Paul Kenneth Bernardo is infamous for a series of crimes that traumatized Canada during the late 80s and early 90s. Together with his then-wife, Karla Homolka, he committed acts of profound violence that claimed 3 lives and left at least 14 to over 20 other victims in their wake. These horrific events fundamentally changed the Canadian legal and social landscape. Paul Bernardo was the youngest child of Kenneth and Marlene Bernardo. On the surface, the family seemed well off, but that wealth was just a facade. Behind closed doors, Paul grew up in a pressure cooker. He frequently watched his father, an alcoholic, brutalize his mother. But the home was even darker than that. There was a sickening secret between his father and his older sister. Watching his own sister being a victim of his own father completely shattered his personality, turning him into a withdrawn and antisocial kid. Things got even worse when his mother's mental health plummeted, and she eventually checked out of parenting altogether. Paul grew up without any emotional guidance. But how did Karla, the wife, become an accomplice to her husband's depravity? What was going through her mind? How could a relationship spiral into such inhuman cruelty? To understand that, we have to look back at the beginning, the moment everything changed. It started in the early 2000s, inside a Canadian prison where a psychiatrist sat down for a high-stakes evaluation. Should Karla Homolka be granted parole? 8 years into a 12-year sentence, she was finally opening up about the perfect couple who turned into monsters. Let's go back to where it all began. This session was a turning point. She was up for parole after serving 8 years of a 12-year sentence for her role in crimes that devastated several young women. She had only received a lighter sentence because she turned state's witness against her husband, Paul Bernardo. In front of the doctor, Karla began to revisit her dark memories. With a calm demeanor, she walked him through her first meeting with the charismatic Paul Bernardo. She explained how their relationship slowly spiraled into something toxic and lethal. It started when Karla and her friend Peggy attended a veterinary conference in Toronto. While they were unwinding at their hotel bar, 2 men approached them, Paul and his associate Nick. With his good looks and charm, Paul hooked Karla instantly. Their first night was intense, and they didn't hold back in showing how quickly they'd bonded. The relationship moved at lightning speed, but it was dysfunctional from day one. Paul was openly dominant and abusive, and he even admitted to having violent tendencies. But Karla was already hooked. Instead of walking away, she felt challenged, becoming more deeply entangled in his dark influence. Then, Dr. Arnold shifted the focus to Karla's 15-year-old sister, Tammy.
I would like to talk to you about your sister, Tammy.
The doctor suspected jealousy. Maybe Karla was bothered by how obsessed Paul seemed to be with the teenager. But Karla's answer was chilling.
Became jealous of Tammy.
I wasn't.
She admitted that she was so desperate to hold on to Paul that she was willing to make an unthinkable choice. Paul had a twisted obsession with power and control over vulnerable people, and Karla, blinded by an unhealthy attachment, made the haunting decision to assist him. Karla sacrificed her own sister's safety just to keep Paul happy. Using her position at a vet clinic, she stole a powerful sedative. On Christmas Eve, they spiked Tammy's drink. It didn't take long for Tammy to lose consciousness. As her sister lay defenseless, Paul began his exploitation. And even worse, they filmed it. Karla, who should have been her sister's protector, stood there, witnessing the betrayal of the very person she was sworn to protect. But the controlled plan quickly turned into a nightmare. Shortly after losing consciousness, Tammy stopped breathing. Panic set in. They called 911, but before the paramedics arrived, Karla made a cold, calculated move to cover their tracks. They acted to ensure their secret stayed buried, terrified of the consequences closing in on them. When the doctors examined Tammy, they declared her dead. Karla and Paul's grief looked so genuine that no one suspected foul play. Tammy's death was initially ruled an accidental overdose, and the case was closed without a second thought. As time went on, Paul's financial situation began to crumble after he lost his job. While it doesn't detail his previous career, it was clear he no longer had a steady income to maintain his lifestyle. Seeing this, his associate, Nick, offered him a shortcut, an illegal smuggling operation moving cigarettes across the border. The potential profit was substantial. Paul stood to make thousands of dollars a month. Lured by the promise of fast money and feeling like he had no other options, Paul jumped at the opportunity. With these illicit earnings, he and Karla finally moved into a house of their own. However, the walls of that new home became silent witnesses to the instability of their relationship. Karla's days were filled with contradictions. At times, she experienced flashes of affection, but they were constantly overshadowed by Paul's aggressive and domineering behavior. Even though the atmosphere in the house often felt suffocating, Karla chose to stay, trapped under Paul's influence. Just before their wedding, Paul made a chilling confession. He admitted that he had committed heinous acts against several young women in the past. Instead of walking away, Karla felt powerless to stop him. Whether it was twisted love or blind obsession, she feared losing Paul more than she worried about the safety of others. Because of that, she chose to turn a blind eye, standing by a man she knew was a monster. One night, Paul woke Karla up and told her he had brought a girl to the house. He ordered her to stay in the bedroom and not interfere. Driven by an uneasy curiosity, Karla ignored his warning. She crept downstairs and peered into what was happening. She saw a girl completely defenseless while Paul was recording his actions. That moment marked the point of no return. Karla fully realized the scope of Paul's actions, and it was the beginning of her deeper involvement. Under Paul's pressure and influence, Karla was coerced into participating in acts that were documented on camera. But in the midst of it all, the situation spiraled into chaos when the victim regained consciousness and caught a clear look at Paul's face. Fearing he would be identified, Paul lost control. To cover his tracks, he made a horrific decision. He decided to take the girl's life. With Karla's help, they attempted to conceal the evidence permanently. They treated the victim's remains in a way that would make them nearly impossible to identify before finally disposing of them in a deep lake. 2 weeks later, the day Karla had been waiting for finally arrived. She and Paul were officially married in a church, surrounded by family and friends in a ceremony that appeared sacred to everyone watching. But shortly after they returned from their honeymoon, everything began to unravel. The secret they had fought so hard to bury was exposed when a fisherman discovered a body in the lake, the remains of their previous victim.
And they identified the body of that girl that they found in the lake.
What? The news triggered immediate panic in Paul. Instead of staying calm, he lashed out, blaming Karla entirely. He accused her of being careless in covering their tracks. This moment exposed Paul's true manipulative nature. He was a coward who refused to take responsibility, constantly putting more pressure on Karla as the situation grew desperate. After the discovery, Paul decided to pause his criminal activities. But the bottled-up anxiety and frustration turned him into a ticking time bomb. He became increasingly aggressive and abusive toward Karla. Those around him began to notice too. Paul's friends slowly drifted away, disturbed by his unpredictable and volatile personality. Trapped in this cycle of abuse, Karla felt hopeless. Instead of leaving, she became desperate for the affection Paul had started to withhold. In a state of mental instability, she came up with a horrifying idea. To win back his approval and affection, she offered to help him with his next crime. She hoped that becoming a partner in his dark plans would mend their broken relationship. It was a decision that showed just how far Karla had lost her moral compass, blinded by a toxic obsession. Their next target was a student named Christine. They used a cunning tactic. Karla, appearing non-threatening, approached Christine by pretending to ask for directions. As the victim let her guard down, Paul suddenly appeared and forced her into their vehicle at knife point. It happened so fast that Christine had no chance to call for help. However, a small detail was left behind. One of Christine's shoes was found on the road. This became the lead that sparked a massive police investigation. After holding Christine captive for days, the tragedy ended in her death. Panicked and desperate to cover his tracks, Paul took extreme measures to dispose of the evidence, dumping her remains in a remote area far from civilization. Eventually, a passerby discovered the remains. Paul felt safe, thinking he had buried the truth forever. But he didn't realize the police had already gathered critical evidence from the initial kidnapping. Witnesses had reported seeing a beige sedan in the area, and news reports confirmed that police were closing in on the vehicle's identity. Soon enough, his nightmare became reality when a police car pulled into his driveway. Paul, feeling cornered, tried to stay calm. He smoothed out his appearance and spoke to the officer. Using his gift of gab, he convinced the officer that his car was merely a coincidence, just a similar-looking model. The officer left without suspicion. But instead of feeling safe, this incident began Paul's mental breakdown. Inside the house, the atmosphere turned toxic. Paul grew paranoid, convinced that he was being watched. He took out his fear and frustration on the only person there. Karla. He became emotionally unstable, frequently exploding in rage and turning physically violent. The marriage Karla had dreamed of had truly turned into a living hell. No matter how much Karla loved him, her physical and mental strength had reached a breaking point. The abuse became so severe that she suffered serious injuries. At that low point, she finally realized she would never survive if she stayed under Paul's control. With the last of her courage, Karla went to the authorities to report the abuse. This decision didn't just save her life. It opened the door to the darkest secret they had shared. Initially, Karla only reported the domestic violence, but as the investigation deepened, the situation exploded into something much larger. She eventually revealed Paul's role in the string of disappearances that had gripped the public. Her confession became part of a plea deal with the prosecution. Karla agreed to provide information in exchange for a lighter sentence. This agreement became known to the public as a deal with the devil, a term that captured the massive controversy surrounding the case. Some saw Karla as a coerced victim, while others saw her as an active participant who successfully manipulated the law to secure her own freedom. Eventually, the relationship between Karla and Paul ended, and both were forced to face the legal consequences of their actions. Meanwhile, the situation Paul had tried so hard to control began to crumble. As the investigation closed in on him, his options quickly vanished, and authorities finally moved in to make an official arrest, marking the end of the secret string of crimes he had committed. When the case finally made it to court, the dynamic between Karla and Paul took a sharp turn. Karla chose to cooperate with the prosecution, providing testimony that was deeply damaging to Paul. She portrayed herself as someone acting under his influence and control, though her active role in the events remained a major point of contention. Paul, on the other hand, fought back, insisting that Karla was not merely a witness, but a full partner who was involved in every single one of his actions. After reviewing the evidence and the terms of the plea deal, the judge handed down a life sentence for Paul, with no possibility of parole. Karla, however, received a 12-year sentence in exchange for her testimony. The decision immediately sparked public outrage. Many argued that Karla was just as guilty, especially given that she had witnessed the recorded acts herself. Others maintained that she was simply under Paul's spell. The story eventually circles back to the evaluation sessions between Karla and Dr. Arnold. 10 days after those sessions, a shocking report was released. Karla's request for parole had been denied. The psychologist concluded that the remorse Karla had displayed was nothing more than a manipulative act, a performance completely void of genuine regret. In Dr. Arnold's professional opinion, Karla was cold-hearted and calculating. This assessment was further reinforced by the heartbreaking reality shared by the victims' families, who stated that they had never once heard an apology or a word of remorse from Karla. She was left to serve out the remaining 4 years of her sentence.